Thank you. So moving on with our agenda today, really excited about this next session, talking about WECC's Reliability Playbook. And we're very privileged to have Greg Parks here with us today to talk a little bit about what WECC's doing and how to use the information that we have. So without further ado, Greg.
Want to thank WECC for allowing me to present to you guys. A little bit about myself and my team. I'm the manager of risk analysis and data services. My clicker. Kim, do you have my clicker? Oh, thank you. I can't work without a clicker. So I'm manager of risk analysis and data services, and WECC is pretty unique in this. NERC is, I like to think, is following WECC a little bit on this. But a couple years ago, Tim Reynolds and Vic Howell really spearheaded an initiative at WECC to drive a new risk management program. And from that, we really wanted to, or they really set up a framework to really start quantifying risks with data, validated data behind it. So they formed a group, the group that I manage today, to do that. So I was hired as a risk analyst about 2.5 years ago at WECC. A little bit about my background. I've been doing this for way too long. Who was working in 1996 in the Western Interconnection? Raise of hands. Gosh, I'm old. So if what happened in 1996 is really what I'm really passionate about. And the Western Interconnection broke up into many islands almost three times that summer. And I was a plant operator at Sierra Pacific Power Company, NV Energy, at that time. And I learned what governor droop and deadband was. Sierra Pacific was part of one of the 5 islands that formed. And we never lost a unit due to overspeed or any plant protection. We didn't drop 1 unit, but we experienced under frequency about 5 times each one of those days. So as a plant operator, you really get to understand what governor droop is, what frequency response is. It was really a formative time in my life. So it's kind of really driven my career, I think. I really like frequency, and you're going to see that in my presentation. So my team is responsible for the risk management process at WECC. We're on version 2.0. A lot of people don't know we're on 2.0. We've had it for about 2 years, and we're already updating it. So we'll be rolling out a lot of that work. You'll hear about that from my boss, Tim, tomorrow. But in association to that, I have a data services team. So I'm really fortunate to have some really great professionals working for me. And our job at WECC is to really collect all of the data that we use for reliability assessments, event analysis, situational awareness, and try to validate it and use it across our organization, and then present what's available publicly to you all to use in your own programs. So that's our overall goal of what we really want to do. And I think we've learned a lot in the short time that we've been doing it. And so what I'm going to present today is some of those things that we've learned, and it's really around not just risk, but what drives risk. And in my opinion, in our industry, we're an aircraft carrier, and you don't turn them on a dime. And with grid transformation, we're turning this thing on a dime. And I don't think anybody realizes the pace that we're moving at today with grid transformation, IBRs, everything that I'm gonna talk about. The data really supports it, but I don't think we really understand how rapidly we are changing. And that's really one of the big drivers of risk in my book in what we do day to day. So, long story short, that's my story. Hopefully we can get it to work. One of the first things we started looking at, we get a lot of forecast data at WECC that we use in reliability assessments. And somebody said, well, how accurate are our forecasts? And that's really a loaded question if you ever do that kind of work. So one of my analysts said, well, what's our demand look like? You know, how variable is our demand over any period of time? And generally you think it grows, a little bit every year. Now we've got large loads coming in. It's going to be pretty significant changes year to year. But really, it's something that we can predict pretty well. So we started putting some data together. So this is a graphic off of our system performance data portal. This is public data available to you. It's off the WECC homepage. I'm selling it hard here. Please go to it, give us feedback. But my analyst built this for me. This is some of the tools we use. And she goes, it looks like a duck. And the first thing I thought of, oh, this is a California load curve, but it's not. So what this is 4 years of load data. This is the month of June. This is the average load per hour, hours 1 through 24 for the month of June. And if you notice, that yellow line is really, really low. So if we zoom in, we identified it that it was really driven by 3 of our areas. The Basin, California, Rocky Mountain, and the Southwest. I wanted to touch a little bit on that specifically. When I started 2.5 years ago, every one of our assessments was a little bit different. We had different regions that we were doing assessments on, and you really couldn't tie operational data to what our assessments were saying. So today, when you go to any WECC report, any NERC LTRA, anything associated with what we say is going to happen in the future or what has happened in the past, we've really come up with these standard definitions of the regions of the West. 2 years ago, we called the West the West. And everybody that works here understands that Colorado is much different than California, and California is way, way different than Utah and Wyoming. So we broke the West into regions, and the regions are there on the screen for you to see, but they're pretty defined geographically, resource type, et cetera. And we hope to make it helps us make sense and tell our story when we talk about reliability assessments and our data that our performance data that we're looking at. So we identified in this load variability that June of 2023 was really interesting. And the first thing you see when you see a data set like this is, so this is the average load per hour for the month of June, hours 1 through 24. And you never see an anomaly like this. This is bad data. If you deal with data, this is bad data. We got a bad data set. So as we started digging into it, it's not a bad data set. It just is how variable our load can be in any month. So if we looked at the data, the average megawatt in this pocket averaged 79,600 megawatts in this specific hour of 18. And all the years around it, it was close to 20,000 megawatts greater. Now, if you're trying to do any kind of assessment, any kind of forward looking, you're always going to look back. And what this really told us is you better be very diligent about the data that you're looking at. To explain how extreme this data set was, you'd have to go back almost 13 years to find a load in the month of June that was that low. To us, when we're doing reliability assessments, we better know this outlier data. It's very, very important for us to know it. If you're in real-time operations, I worked as a manager of a grid control center for many years, and what we would do in summer assessments is we looked at what happened last summer and said, hey, this summer is going to be a little bit worse than last summer. We'll go get a snapshot from June and understand what our peak demand was. If you did that in 2024, you were going to be off by about 20%. So what we really understood here was that understanding your data is very, very important. So if we look at the entire Western Interconnection, it just propagated all the way across it. So we had to go back to 2011 to find a demand that was nearly as low. So to us, this was really, really informative that if we don't provide this data to you all to understand, this isn't a bad data set on your side. You weren't the only one with having extreme low load, because the inverse can be the same too. Everybody can be seeing extreme high load, but you have to go back 12 years to find that same demand level in the whole Western Interconnection. So another interesting thing, how fast is the load growing in the West? So this is the last full year that we had, 23 to 24. What was really interesting about this was between 23 and 24, our non-coincidental peak, when you take the peaks of every balancing authority in the West, grew by almost 6%. That is an astronomical number for peak load. That is just non-expected. The total energy served between 23 and 24 was up 2.44%. These numbers are just astronomical. If you've been in any kind of grid operations, resource adequacy programs, anywhere, these numbers are unbelievably. This is before any large load is coming in. This is the pace that we're moving at today. So we're seeing extremely rapid change in what we're doing as far as the variability of demand. Very low demand at some seasons, but just massive growth year to year is what we're seeing. All this data I'm showing you is public. If it is data that we're collecting, we do have some frequency data in here also. We consider that public. So we do provide it all to you. But I really wanted to stress what we're seeing in variability of demand, year-over-year growth, peak load is at a pace we really haven't seen across the interconnection in my 35 years working in the West. So that's I'll stop and see if there's any questions on the data. If it confuses you, if it makes sense, feel free to ask any questions. Raise your hand and I'll reach out to you. But I really wanted to stress variability load is going to be a big problem in the future. Yes, sir. If you could, that'd be great. Or I can repeat your question if you want. The weather is that much more variable. So the question was that erroneous data or not? We scoured it and scoured it and scoured it. It is accurate data. About 15 or 20 BAs in the Western Interconnection actually experienced average demand in the month of June in 2023 that was significantly lower than any year in recent history. And that's, I'd never seen that displayed anywhere, that we could see that much variability in June. When I was in system operations at NV Energy, we always had EEA 3s in June. That was our worst month of operations, was June. And to see this in 23, it's not newsworthy. It's just not newsworthy. So thank you for your question. But no, great data, perfect data. So the source of this data, I think that's important for me to touch on a little bit. Most people don't know this, but we collect this data from you all every year through our loads and resources process. So every year, WECC reaches out to all BAs in the West, and we collect a whole bunch of data, historical data, resource-based data, what units you have, when they were commissioned, what year they were commissioned, when they're expected to retire. We also get forecast data. What's your 5-year forecast looking like? What's your 10-year forecast looking like? These are all inputs that we use in all of our reliability assessments. But we are allowed to share most of this data publicly, and we do. And hopefully you all can benefit from some of this data that's out there. But this is all public data. We're one of the few regions that is producing this in this format. So I'm really proud of the work that my team has done on it. But it is very available and usable by all public folks in the West. Do want to stress, if you want it in a different format, reach out to my team. They'll dump it into a CSV file and you can have it in Excel and do with it whatever you want. We use Power BI quite a bit, so it's our analytics tool of choice. So a lot of the stuff we're built on is built on Power BI. But no, it was real data, and I was shocked to see that kind of variability in an entire average month of June. Really different. I'll just go back a little bit. If you look at these other months, that's what you expect to see from one year to the next. Very similar load shapes across an operating day. That's normal. When we saw that, we thought it was data error for sure. So thank you for your question. Anybody else on the load variability? I think large loads is going to be very challenging for us all, not just from a resource, but really being able to forecast what our loads are doing is going to be very difficult. Not sure if everybody understands, we had a major event in Wyoming in November 13th. That was really, there'll be a NERC joint WECC report come out of that, hopefully by June, Tim, is our goal. But a big part of that, variability of wind resource. That's going to be I think something that's going to be very interesting to everybody. We have a lot of challenges in operation today, and it's all around variability. So this is probably some of my favorite stuff, and some of this is probably going to be an eye chart, so I'll try to walk it through with some of you guys. Apologize for that, but it is really, really interesting. Show of hands. Does anybody think that we have more than 50,000 megawatts of inverter-based resources, PV or wind, in the West? Show of hands. How about 75,000 megawatts? How about over 100,000? Not counting batteries. So just a couple think it's over 100,000. We've exceeded 100,000 megawatts of IBR in the West this year. That's installed capacity. Does anybody know what our peak demand is in the West? Anybody want to take a guess? Somebody, is it over 100,000 megawatts? How about over 150? It's about 168,000 is what our peak demand is. If you looked at those charts, our average demand in July was about 130,000. So in an average July day, if we have wind and solar running, we have the capacity to serve about 80% of it. That's a big, big percentage of our resource mix is being covered by IBR. I was asking a colleague this morning if he knew how much battery installation we have in the West today. And it's a black hole. Nobody really knows. Everybody knows we've been installing batteries, but we have about 27 gigawatts of installed capacity in the West. If you take that and understand that you got to charge a battery to get any energy out of it, it's about 54 gigawatts of differential in our battery fleet today. That's only about 50 nuclear plants. So now maybe 45 Columbia generating stations in our battery fleet today, and it's still going up. So these resources are fabulous. They perform well. The batteries are really, really interesting. They perform phenomenally well with fast frequency response. We had a very large event, several large events this summer were loss of load events, and our interconnection frequency response was probably twice as good as we expected it to be. A lot of that is due to IBR footroom. We always think of headroom on units. IBRs always have footroom. So when we have a loss of load event, we tend to perform really, really well. One of the problems though with batteries is they only work when they're on. So they only provide these resources, when they're actually connected to, not just connected to the interconnection, but actually generating or charging. So under FERC order, they're required to be frequency responsive, but if they're idle, there is no requirement. So about 50% of the time, a battery is either charging or discharging. The other time it's doing nothing. So if you have this big resource that is very, very adaptable, dispatchable, 50% of the time it's not going to give you any of those reliability services that you count on. So we do have some challenges with batteries. The great thing about it, when we start talking about inertia here in a little bit, is that you will see the batteries can actually perform really, really well if we need them. The November 13th event, I think we saw an impact to the interconnection of about 3,500 megawatt deficiency when that event happened. Number's still out a little bit. That's about 120% of our RLPC, or resource loss protection criteria. That's defined under BAL 3 as the two largest losses that we can handle simultaneously without entering under frequency load shed. So UFLS is the nemesis of what we never want to see. If we ever hit UFLS, it's a very bad day. And so we design our system to handle the two largest, which is about 2,850 megawatts. So that day in November, we lost about 3,500, 120% of our RLPC, and our frequency went halfway to UFLS. We attributed that a lot to batteries. It happened at noon. Batteries are charging, very frequency responsive, and we expect about half of the response came out of our battery fleet in the West due to that interfrequency, or due to that large load loss event. We would have expected and been okay with under-frequency load shedding to occur under how we've planned to operate our system. But we only went halfway to UFLS. So they do perform exceptionally well when they are active. So I just really wanted to stress that. So about 100 gigawatts of IBR in the West. What's the penetration levels look like? So sorry for the eye chart, but so what this graphic is we look at the average load demand in a BA, and we look at their average IBR for each hour of each month. So if you go across the top, it's hour 1 through 24. We take the demand divided by take the generation from IBR divided by the demand, and we come up with this IBR ratio. So here in 2024, the average IBR penetration in the West for hour 13, if I go down, hour 13 in month of May, we had about 40% of our demand was being served by IBR on average for that day. If you go down to the bottom graphic, it shows you the instantaneous demand being served by IBR. So there were some days in 2024 that were approaching 50% IBR serving our demand. That's a huge, huge number. What's really interesting is if we break it down. Everybody knows California is very PV and wind, high levels of penetration. So we expected to see very high numbers in California. And this is what we see. So this is all the utilities in California. This is CalISO, all the BAs in California. CalISO, LADWP, Bank, Turlock, and I think it excludes Imperial Irrigation District. So it's fundamentally CalISO plus all the non-ISO entities. But we are approaching on average about 65% IBR in California on any given middle of the summer day, which is pretty phenomenal. If you notice, there's a shift from between the shoulder months of February, March, and April. That's just due to reduced demand. So as your demand goes down, your ratio will go up. But this is what we expected to see in California. Kind of known, it's popular, it's publicized. We've seen CalISO report that 100% of their demand has been served by renewables on some specific hours of some specific days. But in the whole state of California, we're approaching about 75 to 80% instantaneously on some days. But like I said, an average of 65 to almost 70% of the demand is being served by IBR. That's a big chunk. So California's about, today, about a little bit over 25 to 30% of the Western Interconnection. So it's a big section of the West. And everybody thinks California is leading the herd. So that's kind of the reason I wanted to show this. So if we go to the Southwest, so the Southwest includes Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, and El Paso in Texas, and then a little slice of Imperial Irrigation District. So this is a zone we call the Southwest. What was interesting to this is it's approaching California. On average, we're approaching about 54%. The biggest number there is about 54%. Instantaneously, we're 65 to 70% on any given day on a high load. But very, very close to California, which we would all expect due to the resources in the Southwest. But what most people don't know, and we learned this at WECC by talking to some of our members, some of our Arizona entities came to us and they were at breakneck speed. They were integrating PV and they really wanted to share their experiences with us operationally and some of the work that they were doing. So you kind of think Arizona with their resource is just going to be the major player in this whole thing. Here's what it looks like if you take out Arizona. So what's amazing to me is this number is really driven by state regulators. So this is all the Southwest entities minus Tucson, APS, WECC, and SRP, I'm sorry. And if you notice, the number exceeds California. This area of the Western Interconnection is approaching 90% renewable in some hours of some day on average. and exceeding 100% when you look at the bottom graph for many hours of many days. This is not something that you've seen advertised anywhere. I had never seen it before. When we started crunching this data, we did a lot of data verification. Is this really correct? And it was shocking to us that we expected California to be leading the way, and what we've learned is Nevada, New Mexico are leading the way. Any thoughts or questions? Yes. Yep, to your right.
Yeah, I think this looks great. I just want to ensure this is based on the actual capacity that the IBRs are producing and
This
not
is
the
the-
nameplate.
No, this is the generation of the actual fleet of any hour, not the capacity, but the actual generation.
So this takes into account what they're actually producing, not the nameplate registration.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So this is a graphic that we did not expect to see. We were kind of prompted by this by the Arizona utilities. We thought they were cutting edge, and so did they until we started looking at them. And they're dragging the Southwest down when you compare them to California. So you may not think that if you work in Arizona, you're probably at breakneck speed right now. But trust me, the other states are really at breakneck speed on integrating renewables. Any other questions on this graph? This is publicly available. And I'll go through another display that we've built. We really wanted to know how fast are we changing. So this is another Power BI screen that we've built in data services. It's on our system performance data portal. On the top is that same IBR demand ratio by month by hour that you saw in the previous slide. But down below is the year-over-year change that we've seen. And if you look at it, year-over-year change of over 10% change in that IBR demand ratio across the Western Interconnection. That is a very, very, very rapid change in resource to load. So we were shocked when we built this, that it's changing that rapidly. So this is across the entire Western Interconnection. Our IBR integration is truly rapid. And we've been talking about grid transformation for a long time in this industry. We are seeing grid transformation today. And this is a graphic that really shows that. So how bad is it in some utilities? So one of the best things about my job is I get to look at everybody's data, and you do too. This is Public Service Colorado. When you think of renewable penetration and IBRs, you really don't think of Public Service Colorado, unless you're in Colorado. Then this might not be that shocking to you. They have a very large wind fleet. They have exceptional wind resources in Colorado. They have for a long time, but they've been integrating a vast amount of resources. So Public Service Colorado, as an entity, is approaching 75% renewable penetration on many hours of many days. Want to really highlight the bottom screen here for you. This really shows how variable the wind generation can be. This is an exceptional challenge for an operating entity. So if I was in oversight, I'd be looking at how well do they do operation planning analysis on a day-ahead basis, because their day-to-day variability is extreme. It's really, really extreme. This is something that I would have never expected to see out of Colorado. I'm pretty familiar with all the entities, and this graphic really, really surprised me. So how fast are they changing year over year? Close to 30% change in demand to IBR in 1 year. So what really shocked me about Public Service Colorado is the amount of PV that they've integrated in the last several years. They've had a lot of wind for a long time, but they're shutting down a lot of coal, and they're bringing on a lot of solar and a lot of batteries. And so this number of nearly 30% change in resource mix in 1 year was really, really shocking to me. It is rapid change for a BA. Just as a reference, Public Service, I think, is about a 10,000 megawatt peaking balancing authority, which we consider large in the West. Cal ISO is about 40 to 45,000 Their load keeps going down because of all their rooftop, but so they're about a quarter the size of the Cal ISO, which is our biggest. So we consider PSCO a very large entity, but very, very rapid change. Nobody thinks of New Mexico. This is New Mexico. They're my poster child. On average, 122%. So this means they have more renewables and they're exporting a large amount of them. But again, lots of wind resources in New Mexico, also a lot of solar, they're starting to integrate battery. But really, really lots of red. I was really, really surprised. If you look at the bottom graph, over 200% of their resource to demand in some hours. That is really, really hard to manage as an operating entity. And then if you look at the variability, it goes to 0 on some hours of some days. This is a challenge. This is a dramatic challenge. How fast are they changing? 52%, 53% in 1 year for some hours. This is change that I can't imagine if I was in that operator position of having to be able to keep up with how rapidly it's changing. This is all risk. When you get down to it, the way we operate is really based on what did we do yesterday? What did we do last year? You can't do that in these utilities anymore. It's changing too rapidly. And my former employer, NV Energy, I was shocked. When I left NV Energy in 2014, we had 110 megawatts of wind and about 100 megawatts of solar. Now they're approaching on average 100% of their demand is being served by solar. I've talked to them a little bit personally. I've got friends and colleagues that still work there. Their stated goal is 100% all the time. They're putting in massive amount of batteries. They really want to be able to shut off their gas fleet. This is rapid, rapid change. One thing I wanted to really highlight here, sorry, boomed a little bit, was the difference in the bottom chart from the previous entities. So NV Energy has almost 0 wind. It's almost all solar is their IBR fleet. And if you notice, it goes to 0 almost every day. If you notice in hour 6, it's almost 0 megawatts. They have a little bit of overnight solar, believe it or not, that can be generating in those hours and brings those averages off of 0. But they basically go from no IBR, 100% conventional resources to almost 100% IBR in just an hour or two. And that's a dynamic system to have to operate. These resources are not your mom and pops. They're way different than what we always operated forever. So I thought this was really, really dramatic. How radical are they changing? Very, very radical. As a ratepayer in the state of Nevada, I hope they do a great job. So about a 50% change year over year in their IBR penetration. That's a big number. One of the interesting things about this data is you got to understand the demand of the entities. Southwest entities generally are summer peakers. They're all summer peakers, but dramatic summer peakers. So it's much more difficult to manage resources in the shoulder months because you don't have any load. It's about 3 times less than their peak. So a 10,000 megawatt system for NV Energy, and they'd have about 3,000 megawatts of peak demand in the shoulder months. So really, really dynamic systems. What I really wanted to highlight also was these 3 utilities are approaching about 70% of Cal ISO. So if we just looked at these 3 big utilities, it makes California's renewable penetrations look pretty sorry. So it's not just California, it's across the West. And I think for you all on the compliance side of the business and our side of the enforcement side of the compliance business, our job is to look for risk. Are you handling this correctly? Are you setting your operators up to succeed? Do they have emergency operating plans? How are they going to handle all this from a year-to-year basis, from a day-to-day basis? When I was a system operator, The worst week of any year was the week after Thanksgiving. Does anybody know why? Here's an operator. What's that? So the answer is Christmas lights. So nobody knows that unless you've been a grid operator. So what happens after Thanksgiving is all these idiots get up on ladders and they put up their lights because their wife will not shut up. So everybody puts up their lights, and your first shift back on day shift as a grid operator after Thanksgiving, you are pushing EEAs for the 3 hours that the lights come on. It's that dramatic, just Christmas lights. And this was me 20 years ago. That was the worst day a system operator could have, was your first day back from a long change after Thanksgiving, and all the lights come on, and you go, what just happened? Where did all this demand come from? IBRs are just the opposite of that. And this is happening every day. Every month is going to be different for these operators. And that's a big thing. That's a really, really big thing. So thanks for knowing the answer. Appreciate it. Most people don't know that, but it is dramatic. A little string of lights on a house changes the balancing authority's demand that dramatically from one week to the next. And what we're seeing in IBR penetration just overrides that in spades. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Or just kind of a, oh, am I on? Oh, it is. All right. So with the enormous pickup in the mornings, near 100% in multiple areas throughout the noon, early afternoon, and then the ramp down into the evening, traditional generation, I assume, has to pick up the overnights. How is traditional generation integrating in those very steep ramp up and ramp downs?
It's a challenge, and I do have one of my presentations is on that. If we can wait on that, that'd be great. But it's one of the biggest challenges that we see in balancing operations is that change of resource mix twice a day. Happens twice a day. Happens in the morning, happens at night. One of the great things is we have these batteries now. One of the bad things about the batteries is, I don't know if anybody knows this, but they're generally not owned by the utility. They're owned by these things called banks, and banks want to make money. So they're really not, unless they're providing ancillary services to a balancing authority, they're out there as an arbitrage instrument. That's kind of what we're seeing in California. They're price takers. So I'll talk about that in a little bit, but it is a challenge when we have this large fleet that is out there whose primary purpose is not grid reliability. That's not what they were sold and financed on, but that's what their purpose is, to make their owner money. And you do that through price differential. And that's one of the reasons we're seeing such a large fleet in the West and in Texas, is we see a huge price differential in our spot market. Does anybody ever go to the CalISO website and look at real-time pricing? Well, if you're a geek, you do. Every time it gets hot or cold, I go look. Every time you can see amazing things on that, but you will see very, very, very low prices in the middle of the day. And that's because when we look at the solar penetrations, there's more generation than we need. So the energy imbalance markets, both the WECC and the SPP market, both are looking at that. They're doing real-time pricing. And these batteries are actually price takers. So they're charging when they're getting paid to, and then they're getting paid to discharge that energy back on the grid when the sun goes down. So that's one of the challenges I think we got to look forward to in the future, is how do we reliably integrate these and make sure that these awesome resources really perform the way we expect them to. Any other questions? I don't know if I answered it really well. I'll get to it here in a little bit. Any other questions? So one of my favorites that everybody talks about, nobody really knows, nobody understands it very well. We all think we do. I don't understand it really well, but we'll talk about inertia a little bit and what's going on in the interconnection. So we don't have a standard on inertia. ERCOT has set a minimum inertia level in the ERCOT in the Texas interconnection. They'll make sure that they always have X amount of megawatt seconds of inertia on their system. And they've done that because they have such a large penetration of wind that they had to understand what their minimum inertia level was. We've never done that in the West. All of our studies really show that we don't have an inertia problem. I don't think we have an inertia problem in the interconnection. But there's been some EPRI studies that have been done in the last couple of years that really shows that we might have some regional inertia problems. So inertia is a really interesting thing. Since we don't have a standard, I thought I'd talk about it a little bit and maybe do a little education. So the way the system works for synchronous machines, they're all electrically tied together. Does anybody tow a travel trailer or have an RV? So do you notice it's really hard to pick up speed and it's going down a hill, it really wants to go faster? That's really inertia. Our power system is the same thing. The more inertia you have is basically the more mass that is rotating. So when you're trying to speed it up, it speeds up a lot slower. But the other benefit of it is when you're trying to slow it down, it tries to slow down much slower too. Once you have a mass set in motion, it has a resistance to change that speed. So when you connect a generator to the grid in any interconnection, all those synchronous machines are electrically acting as one. They're running the exact same speed. They might be running different RPMs based on how many pole generators they have, but proportionally, if you have a unit trip in Arizona, Palo Verde trips off, every generator in the Western Interconnection slows down. And that's because they're all electrically tied. This is a great, great benefit to reliability because what it gives you is time. And that's one of the things that we don't have a lot of in interconnected operations. You've all heard that electricity is that one commodity that's got to be generated the instant that it's demanded. You go turn on a light switch, somebody's got to make that electron. One of the great things about inertia is it converts rotating mass to electricity, to megawatt. So the more inertia you have, the more resistant to change the speed you have, and you have a much more resilient system. So we always care about minimum inertia levels in any interconnection. You can't have too much. Too much inertia is a great thing. So this is typically what inertia looks like when you compare it to demand. As your demand goes up, your inertia goes up. And that basically means as you bring every machine on, additional peaking units throughout the day, your inertia will go up as your demand goes up. Your lowest generation historically has always been middle of the morning or early in the morning, right after midnight. In the West, it was always about 4 a.m. So this is what we always would expect inertia to look like. IBRs have changed that. So here's a frequency curve for the same resource loss with different inertias. Basically what it used to look like at 4 a.m., we would drop much lower to under frequency load shedding than we would at 4 p.m. And that was strictly a function of the inertia on the system, which gave governors time to act. Gives the prime mover connected to the rest of the interconnection generators time to open, time to inject more energy, and to recover the balance of generation to load. And time was what we really got out of inertia. So I'm going to do a little training here on statistics. I really want to stress I'm a coal shoveler. I'm not a mathematician. So if I mess this up, give me a little bit of grace. But we use box and whisker plots quite a bit in our industry. And what a box and whisker chart tells you is what the distribution of the data set looks like. So basically, if you have 8,000 points of data, which we would for inertia, it's really interesting to know where the body of the inertia is, but also where the minimums are. So in a box and whisker chart, 50% of the data points will be within the first, the Q1 and Q3. We call that the interquartile range. That basically means if you have 8,000 data points, 4,000 of those will be within the box. We calculate a median and an average also. A median is half the data points are above it, half the data points are below it. We mark that with a line. And we also will mark an average. So normally if you have a perfect distribution, your median and your average will be exactly the same. We never have perfect distributions. What's really cool about this graphic is most of our data is pretty conforming. We have really normal distributions of data in operations. The systems don't change that dramatically from one day to the next. So we can use this to really identify outliers. If we have outlier data, we really like to know. So we've applied this to our inertia data. So we calculate inertia in real time. Not well. We state estimated. So every RC models every generator on the interconnection, and it has an inertial value to it. So in real time, they're monitoring the status of the generators. They know when they're online or offline. Doesn't matter if it's at 0 megawatts or 100 megawatts. If the breaker's closed, it has a certain inertial constant. They calculate that every hour or every 4 seconds. They know the status of the generators, and they sum up all the inertia in their RC area. And then they give that data to us so we can do some analysis on it. Normally what we've done in the past is we just tell you what the minimum inertia level is and the maximum inertia level. And when we started this project, we thought, is that really telling us what the impact of IBRs are on our grid? So another highlight of what that box and whisker chart looks like. So if you remember, this is looking straight down on the data set, and we should see the smaller the Q1 to Q3 interquartile range is, the tighter your data set is, the less variable it is, and then the whiskers really also identify that also. The wider your whiskers, the more volatile your data is. So these are all really interesting things when we start looking at inertia. This is what our inertia looked like in 2016. Our minimum inertia occurred, like we said, at 3 to 5 in the morning. And if you notice, it went up throughout the day. So this is a year's worth of data. The dashed line, I believe, is the median, and the solid line is the average. So more high frequency than low, or high inertia than low inertia. But we always worry about this. This is something that is really, really important to understand how your fleet, it really tells you how the makeup of your fleet. So what this tells us is that we had the least amount of synchronous generation on in the morning, and as the load came up throughout the day, we put more and more generation on. So it's not just interesting to look at the tails, the minimums or the maximums. It's also interesting to look at where 50% of the time we're operating at. This is where we look at today. So we've seen a reduction in our minimum inertia of about 10%, 450 gigawatt seconds, down from 500 gigawatt seconds. But the most dramatic thing is it's happened in the middle of the day. Our minimums in the early morning really haven't changed, and that's because we're serving the same load with synchronous generation early in the morning. Any questions? We're not done with this. This really, really highlighted to me, we are in the middle of grid transformation. These fleets of generators don't change rapidly. We don't commission generators quickly. We don't retire generators quickly. But in 10 years, we have completely changed the composition of our resource mix. And this really tells you the amount of synchronous machines we have on during the day. It's not a lot.
Greg,
Yes.
we received an online question.
Yeah.
How will static reactive power, supply and voltage control services, IBRs, impact the inertia levels and changes?
It does not. So one of the cool things about inertia is it's one of those reliability services that don't really depend on voltage. If the generator is connected to the grid, it is providing a resistance to change speed. That's fundamentally what inertia does. It doesn't have anything to do with voltage control. It has everything to do with speed control. Thanks for the question. We're not done with inertia. There's more cool stuff. Any other questions? I was quite shocked by this. We'd never done this with inertia that I know of in North America, to really look at time of day, season of the year. This is just time of day. It's really not season. Seasonal will look just as interesting. But this to me was really, we know inertia has been dropping in the Western Interconnection. The old way we used to graph it, we used to graph minimum inertia levels, and we saw that it was dropping year over year. That wasn't a surprise. I don't think this was a great surprise, but it's a great representation of the change that we're seeing in the West. Yes, sir. We don't.
Can you
Oh,
repeat the question?
so the question is what's the reliability risk to this reduction of inertia, I guess is what your real question is. We don't think it's real. We don't believe from the studies that we've done at WECC that we're hitting any minimum inertia levels by any means. 450 gigawatt seconds is still a lot of inertia on any power system. As a reference, I talked about Texas. They approach 100 gigawatt seconds, and they're about half our size. And they've set that as kind of their critical inertia level. So we don't think, we don't believe from our studies that we're hitting a reliability risk, but we are changing rapidly. That's really the whole point of this, is the rapid change that we're seeing. We saw a rapid change from 24 to 25, really significant. We believe that was really a lot to do with battery integration. One of the things that batteries really allow an operator to do, and I use the operator in the big sense, a grid operator, is they can turn units off because they have this resource that can be turned on immediately. So most generating resources take at least 10 minutes to start. Many coal plants take hours to start. But if you have 1,000 megawatts of battery that you can turn on whenever you need it because you lost a unit, and you have to get that energy back, it changes your dispatch. Your unit commitment changes dramatically when you have this very flexible facility that you can rely on. And that's what we're seeing, is it's changing our unit commitment pretty dramatically. So we think this rapid change is really in response to batteries. Yes, sir. So thanks, Glenn. So Glenn's question was, do batteries provide a similar reliability product that inertia does? And the answer is definitely yes. We call it fast frequency response. Don't ever call it synthetic inertia. I think we'll get sued. We've banned the synthetic inertia from our vernacular many years ago, but fast frequency response. CalISO has done a lot of work with that in particular. And they've done a lot of testing and demonstration of their battery fleet. And so the way governors usually work is we have a dead band and we have a droop. So deadband is a point in that governor control, and this governor control can be in a physical machine, a rotating machine, but it's also in IBR plant controllers. And what governor droop and deadband do is basically tell that controller to do nothing if frequency is good. And if you remember, inertia is the one that slows down frequency changes. So we really allow frequency to move off a nominal. And that's really an economic issue. If you wanted to really control frequency to 60 cycles at all times, you'd burn a lot of fuel to do it. So as an industry, we said, we can let frequency move. And we, generally, the deadband is about 36 millihertz, plus minus. So we allow that frequency to really move between 59.96 and 60.04 without any governor control action. And we do that to save fuel, save wear and tear, save a lot of things on a generator. But as soon as you hit the deadband, the governors become active. And then they follow what we call a droop curve. And you'll hear 5% droop a lot, sometimes 4%. And what that means is for a 5% change in frequency, the governor is going to go wide open. So a 5% change of frequency is about 3 hertz. We think things are bad at half a hertz. So we're not talking about large changes of generators, but with 5,000 generators in the West, if everybody gives a little bit, it's a lot of megawatts. So go back to the concept of everybody spinning together, every governor seeing the same frequency change, you have time, and you have a whole fleet behind you. Back to the batteries, when you're increasing the prime mover on a synchronous plant, it's mass, and that's what inertia is. And it takes time to accelerate and put megawatts in. You got boilers, you got combustion systems, you got water columns. They don't move instantaneously. In a battery, and California's really demonstrated this, CalISO's done a lot of work on it. As soon as they hit deadband, their governors become active, and they'll be injecting megawatts within a half a second. So within a half a second, there's not a prime mover synchronous machine that begins injecting megawatts from their prime mover. So batteries are very, very responsive. So one of the things we're seeing in the West is what we call time to nadir. So anytime we have a frequency deviation, let me go back to here. Uh-oh, I've turned it off. We go back to here. So the nadir is the bottom of the curve. So that's the most important point on this, because we always want to stay out of underfrequency load shedding. In the West, we normally hit the nadir historically before IBRs in about 8 to 10 seconds, which means that frequency decline is not instantaneous, and it drops over about a 10-second time frame. As all that inertial energy is given up, we start plateauing out at the bottom, and then the governors are injecting megawatts, and we recover the frequency back up to deadband. Today, we see time to nadir in 4 seconds, which means the batteries are arresting the nadir. We're seeing megawatts being injected in the first half second, and they're changing where the bottom is because they're injecting megawatts so quickly. It's one of the problems we're actually having with BAL3. If you've been following that drafting team, I'm a member of that drafting team, going since 2017. I think Steve was talking about one that was done in 90 days. That would be a dream. I've been on that drafting team since 2017. The chair's in here somewhere, wherever David Lemons is. Go talk to David, he can fix it. He's been the chair since 2017. But it's one of the problems we're seeing, is that we're not getting enough events in the West. It's a great problem. BAL3 has been very successful. So we used to see about 35 events in the West a year. Anytime a large coal plant trips, a nuclear plant trips, a large hydro trips, frequency drops down to a certain level, we recover. We measure that performance with BAL3. Last year we had 13 events, and 3 of them were exceptional. Three of the events normally wouldn't happen in any year. One was a 3,500 megawatt loss in Wyoming. We also had 2 load shed events in the west of about 1,500 megawatts. We measure the performance on those for about 3. So we're seeing about 10 events a year on average in the west now. Texas is seeing 4 or 5. And it's because we've shut off the large coal plants, and our frequency response from batteries, we believe, and we're seeing evidence of this, we saw really good evidence in November, is recovering our frequency back to an unmeasurable level. So one of the aspects of BAL3 is we're measuring the performance at the BA level. But if we recover frequency back to 60 during the measurement period, there's nothing to measure. That's a good thing. It used to take 4 to 5 minutes to recover frequency back to nominal. We're doing it in 20 to 52 seconds a lot of the time in the West. And usually it's when batteries are active. So Glenn, they do provide a very, very good and solid response. Now, Texas has gone one step farther than the industry has. And if you interconnected a bulk electric connected battery in Texas, it must be frequency responsive at all times. The FERC order didn't require that. Batteries in the rest of the North America only have to be frequency responsive when they're either charging or generating. So Texas has performance from the batteries 100% of the time because of the state regulations it passed. We don't have that luxury in the West or the East. So we do have a little bit of a gap there. Any other questions on this?
Greg,
Yes.
we were asked, how would you describe inertia's role in markets?
Say that again.
How would you describe inertia's role in markets?
In market, it probably doesn't exist. So markets are strictly economic. We don't have an inertia standard. I'm not advocating for one, never will, until I retire, which won't be very many years. It'd be very, very hard to put an inertial requirement in a reliability standard, just because it is everywhere. And who is the owner of that requirement? It'd be very, very difficult. The other one is, do we have a reliability need for it? So we don't have there's nobody in any market that's saying, I got to put on inertia. Nobody's doing that. Any other question?
If you could use the microphones in the aisles.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Greg.
Yep.
So you say, right, we don't have a standard that covers it, and that's specific to inertia, and that makes sense. So my question is, doesn't BAL3 kind of cover the reliability concern associated with inertia? And are there any gaps in the current BAL3 that you can identify that maybe need to be addressed?
So BAL3 really doesn't cover inertia. It covers the results of inertia, which is primary frequency response. I think BAL3 has probably been, I'm very proud to say, probably one of the most successful standards ever written by NERC and the industry. If you go back to 2014, primary frequency response was one of the highest 5 risks to reliability that was identified. We barely make the state of reliability report now on our frequency performance. So that doesn't say we shouldn't have a standard. I think the standard's been so successful that it's greatly enhanced reliability. But I don't think there's any, well, I want to be very careful because the drafting team is working on, should there be a governor requirement? Should there be a droop setting requirement? Should there be a notification requirement? Very, very similar to the VAR standards. We are working diligently to move through that process. We did ballot that in 2023. I think we got 58% approval when we balloted the new standards for governors, but not for inertia by any means. So the drafting team is still working on it. David, did I miss anything up there wherever you're at? He said I did great. So I don't think there's any, we're not seeing that there needs to be an inertial standard. And I've got some more slides here that'll probably highlight what I think the risk is. I believe we have a risk, and it's going to surprise you a little bit. How do we plan? So this is also out of our loads and resources data that we collect every year. So this is the additions that we're expecting to see in the Western Interconnection over the next approximately 10 years. And if you notice, it's very highly dependent upon solar and wind, a little bit of battery, not a lot of anything else of anything substantial. So most of our new resource additions, the vast majority are going to be IBR related, have zero inertia. So one of the things that's really interesting about knowing what the inertia is it tells you a lot about how the transmission planning models respond when you're doing transmission planning studies. Loss of large load, all the things that we're really interested in. So this is what we're expecting to interconnect in the next 10 years. This is what we're expecting to retire. It doesn't look like we're retiring anything but synchronous machines. A little bit of solar, a little bit of wind. We have some 20-year-old solar plants, which just blows me away. We have some 20-year-old wind plants, but the majority of what we're retiring over the next 10 years is fundamentally natural gas and coal, two major suppliers of inertia in the system. So we should be modeling this in our transmission planning models, right? WECC produces a whole bunch of base cases. All of our planning coordinators, transmission planners send in what the system's going to look like in 10 years, and we should be good. So this is the historic inertia levels. This is the way we used to display inertia. The dotted lines just say we didn't have a very complete data set, less than 90% complete. The dark lines are greater than 90% complete. So we've been seeing a reduction in inertia. We know that. We don't expect it to change. We expect a reduction in minimum inertia to continue. Here's what our transmission planning cases look like. So the dark blue lines are the total inertia in the planning cases. The yellow and blue lines are the southern and northern island inertias. So and this is from the transmission planning cases. Everything with a 1 is light spring, 2 is heavy spring, light summer, heavy summer, light winter, heavy winter. 2025, 2030, and 2034. So about 10 years of planning cases. Not every season is covered in our advanced cases, but this is what the inertia looks like in the islands. So we do see that the southern island inertia is less than the northern island inertia. That's not a big surprise. But here's what it looks like when you actually compare it to real-time operations. So what this is showing is if we look at the minimum inertia levels, the minimum in real time very closely matches the minimum in the planning cases for the light spring case. But if you go across the years, our planning cases show inertia is increasing. Our data shows inertia is declining. Our forecast data of resources show inertia is declining, but our transmission planning cases don't reflect that. We're showing generally increasing inertia in all but the light spring cases. The math doesn't math. So if I was going to state a risk, and it might be on our risk register someday, is the model accuracy due to IBR integration is not matching what we think is actually going to be built in the system. This is really important. It really means when you're talking about an IBR, it's just not inertia. It's short circuit ratios. It's a whole bunch of other electrical engineering attributes that synchronous machines have a much different attribute than an IBR. And our transmission planning cases are not matching what we're seeing in our data, of our historical data. So this is probably the first time I'll say this looks like a risk to me. Modeling seems to be very, very important. And our planning cases do not seem to be trending in the same direction that our data is selling it should go. Any questions? I just dropped a bomb, I felt like. I stated a risk. I like it. I stated a risk. Any questions on this? I will add one thing. We did poll the industry a couple months ago, Tim. Sent out thousands of emails, hundreds, probably thousands. The industry came back and said they don't believe our transmission planning cases related to inertia are a significant risk. So we're actively monitoring at WECC, but we have no activity to actually mitigate what may be or may not be a risk. The industry said the transmission planning cases are adequate. What this is really showing for everybody, I'll go back to this curve right here. In the transmission planning cases, we have about 8,800 hours a year. In any operating day, we have great variability. So when is peak demand? When is light spring? When is heavy spring? Which hour of which day are we setting our system up to model? Because if you just move 4 hours in that day, you're operating a completely different system. And you're also planning for a completely different system. So all the dynamics of that system will be different in any single day. Is our planning cases adequate for the systems that we're seeing today? We're seeing dramatic changes in generation dispatch in an operating day, and our planning cases look at specific time snaps of any single day. It doesn't look at multiple time snaps in light spring as an example. But our resource mix is dramatically different between noon and 6 in the night. That's the risk. Do we know what we're operating? Any questions? All right, now we're going to do some math. We did a little statistics that I'm horrible at. We're going to do a little bit of math. So back to your question about PVs and frequency control a little bit. This is what I'm going to touch on a little bit. So about 2 years ago, the Resources Subcommittee started working on this issue specifically. We've been hearing that balancing authorities are really struggling with time of day ramps, and we really attributed it to solar coming on in the morning and solar going away at night. So how do you measure that? Is it getting more difficult? Is it becoming a reliability risk? What's it look like? So we started working on that on the RS, and we wanted to make a metric that made sense to balancing authorities. And the value that we use to tell you how good you're regulating is CPS1 from BAL1. I'm not sure if you've all done the math. I hope not. It's horrible math. But basically, we're looking at if you're helping frequency for any operating minute, you're going to get a good score. If you're hurting frequency for any operating minute, you're going to get a bad score. And that score is basically 100%. So if you're helping, you're going to get a score greater than 100%. If you're hurting, you're going to get a score less than 100%. If you're hurting really badly, you can get a score less than minus 700%, and that's called a BAL violation from BAL1. That means you're really hurting frequency. Your ACE is extremely negative, the frequency is low, and you're making it worse. That's basically what the values tell us. So we wanted to convert that known value of 100% good, less than 100% bad, into a metric that we could quantify what the frequency control is in the interconnections. We do this for the East also. So one of the fundamental, what we look at in CPS1 is reporting ACE. Well, one of the cool things about that, we look at reporting ACE and we look at frequency deviations in reporting ACE. So we look at the ability to schedule actuals to schedule, and we look at how well the frequency control is doing in reporting ACE, and then the math gives us a number of how well you did based on how well the frequency is doing. Well, in an interconnection, there is no interchange. Actuals or schedules, everything sums to 0. So all we're really looking at in an interconnection is delta frequency. So our CPS1 interconnection value is fundamentally 100. That puts it into the 100% range. 2 minus delta frequency over epsilon epsilon 1 squared. So delta frequency is what was the scheduled frequency. In the West, it's always 60. What was the actual frequency? That'll give us our delta. We square it. Epsilon 1 squared is the noise of the interconnection. We never draw straight lines. Epsilon 1, I believe, is 22 millihertz in the West. That's how much noise we allow. Frequency moving out 0.022 millihertz. We square that, and that gives us a CPS1 interconnection score. And it normalizes everything. We could have done the same graphic with delta frequency, basically is what we can do. We have a non-variable in the bottom that we square, and we have a variable in the top. We're just measuring delta frequency with this calculation. But really what we're trying to do is tell you, is it good or bad? Delta frequency doesn't really tell you how bad it is. But a minus percentage is really bad. Anything under 100 is bad. Anything above 100 is good. So with this thought in mind, could we apply this to our solar ramps hurting us at any point in time? So this is the way we used to look at CPS1 and the interconnection. We call this weighted CPS1. What we've done at WECC for many years is we collect all the monthly CPS1 values from every BA. We weight them based on the size of the BA, so a little BA doesn't get weighed the same as Cal ISO. We weight them based on their relative size to each other, and we get the CPS1 graph that really is pretty constant between, it's actually been going up or steady for the last nearly 10 years. And this is what we see. So if you hear of an operator saying, control's getting worse, the data doesn't support it. It looks good. Our control at the BA level is great. So the problem with CPS1 is it's not a instantaneous value. It's not a daily value. It's actually a monthly value. And the reliability metric is a rolling 12-month, as you all know. So this is a monthly CPS1 score that we weight. It's not the rolling. It shows a little bit of variability, seasonal perhaps, year to year perhaps, not really sure. But generally it's been improving. We think that's because of the energy imbalance markets. Energy imbalance markets help with variability of the resource. So we believe that CPS1 has been getting better on average in the West. But that's not what you hear from the balancing operators. They say it's getting hard to control during these solar ramps. In the morning, when the solar comes on, frequency goes high. When the solar goes off at night, when we're trying to bring all these units on, frequency lags, and it's getting harder and harder. And we wanted to be able to measure that. So this is what we did. Similar graphic. So this is the average CPS1 by hour by month. Below is the box and whisker chart. I apologize, I didn't catch this till to this morning, but the months aren't in order on the box and whiskers, and I'm not sure what order they're in. So I'll walk through this a little bit with you. It gets dramatically different, though. The box and whiskers are really important to this discussion. What this tells us is that all the months are really the same, relatively the same. The box and whiskers look really, really similar. We have bad days. Bad hours of bad days is what the box and whiskers tell us. But the upper one really tells us how bad was it. And you can kind of see the solar ramp coming in. Solar ramps are harder in the shoulder months because you have less demand. You have a higher ratio. So as we look at this, 2016, we can see some solar impacts. But generally, month to month, it looks pretty good. Very consistent. 2020, we start to see more solar ramps in the 1700 time frame. November and October and December are starting to look very variable. And if you notice, the tail of those is down to minus 200%, which means we have certain hours in those months that the interconnection CPS1 score was near minus 200%. That's nearly a BAL violation for the entire interconnection for that hour. That tells us that frequency control is not good. Now, it's not a violation. This is our own metric that we love, but we made it up. But it does tell us something really substantial. Solar ramps are difficult. So this is back in 2020. 2021, it got better. Or did it? No, it just got worse everywhere. If you look at the tails, they're worse almost all the way across. Of course, the shoulder months are worse, but we also got worse in the high load months. The heat map on top, we have some hours of some months that were at 20%. So for every hour 17 in the month of February, so every day of the month of February, 28 days, we averaged 20% CPS1 for that entire month, for that hour. That is, we expect to see some bad days, but not every bad day. 2022, we can definitely still see the solar, but we see a lot of tails below 200%, negative 200%. It's getting very, very difficult to control frequency during solar ramps. 2023, if you look at the top heat map, it seems to be a lot more red. Solar ramps are getting worse. We do have good news though. 2024, we're starting to see minus 300% in some months. Continually getting worse. And 2025, about the same as 2024. We expected batteries to make a more significant improvement in our regulation. And what it really taught us is that batteries generally are not being deployed for regulation. CAISO does have a certain amount that are on regulation. Some of the other battery owners also are. But when we look at the entities that own batteries, it's a handful. There's only about 5 or 6 entities that own significant batteries in the West. So even though we have 27 gigawatts of batteries, they're very concentrated in a few number of BAs. So they're really not having the reliability impact that we hoped, that I hoped we would see. I would say it's arrested between 24 and 25. It hasn't gotten worse. But it does indicate, is a rolling 12-month CPS1 score an adequate reliability metric? We do have BAL, which is a 30-minute metric. You must operate with above minus 700 for less than 30 minutes consecutive. So we do have that standard, but our control is getting worse. And that's basically what the data is telling us. Is it a reliability risk? We don't believe so. But it's something that we got to keep an eye on. And it does indicate, CPS2, that maybe we need a different metric. If anybody remembers CPS2 as a 10-minute metric, we would probably have a revolt in the industry if we got rid of BAL and went back to CPS2. So I think the goal of the RS is maybe to do some of that analysis. What would a CPS2 metric have looked like? Would it have changed the behavior of the BAs to regulate differently? We don't think there's a significant reliability risk. We're not talking about frequency going extremely low. We have a very large margin to USLF, and that's a concern that we have, of course. We want the market to, we want the operators to make money. And how much noise can we handle? How much frequency deviation can we handle and still be reliable? That's really the task of the RS in the next couple of years, is how much can we handle? Any questions on CPS1? All this data is available on the System Performance Data Portal. So if you want to give us feedback, we are encouraging it. If you have a question about a graphic, we'll answer anything we have. All this is user controllable. You can look at all this yourself if you want the source data. I do have a story about this though. This is frequency data. So you plug in a transducer into the wall, you get data. That's all this is frequency data. We get this from NERC. They get it streamed from the RCs in real time, and we've gotten it from NERC forever. We also get it from BPA. BPA is gracious enough to give us their frequency source. It's public data. It's edge of grid. You plug it into the wall. We thought we had great data because it's frequency. How bad can it be? And if anybody's done any data and analytics, if you compare 2 data sources to each other, you hope they match, and if they don't, which one's right? So what we found in this is we needed 3 data sources. So Avista gave us a data source also. What we had found was the person pulling the data out of the data historian, has an impact on the quality of the data. So you might think you have great data, and it looks great, passes the sniff test, you do all your data analytics. If you don't have anything to compare it to, you don't know how good the data is. So it wasn't a significant error, it wasn't a significant deviation, but it taught us that for this metric, we need to have validated data. And it took us a lot of work to validate that data. You would think something as simple as frequency that you plug into the wall, it's always right. We learned that it's not. So don't take your data for granted. Any questions on CPS1, interconnection CPS1? The NERC-RS does this quarterly. They have a pretty extensive history of doing analysis on this. They look at specific hours and look at changes year over year. What I really wanted to highlight is the reason we're doing this at the NERC-RS is because this is also showing up in the Eastern Interconnection. Eastern Interconnections is at least 4 times larger than the West, doesn't have the renewable penetration of the West, and they're starting to see solar ramping issues in the East. And that was really, really surprising to us on the RS, because we didn't think it was, penetration levels were high enough to really cause a problem in the East, but they are starting to see top of our solar ramp control problems. Any questions on CPS1? But the RS does publish these quarterly. I'm not sure if they're on the new NERC website yet, but they will be soon if they're not already there. So if you go to the RS section of the RSTC, it's one of the document sections that we're trying to publish all this out publicly. Like I said, we expect this is public information. It's just frequency. That's all we're looking at is delta frequency. All right, did I miss anybody? Now my favorite. Top of hour frequency events. So we looked at this graphic a little bit. This is from Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. You'll see this graphic everywhere in just about every NERC document. They use this graphic. This really tells us what's going on during a unit trip, loss of generation. We have an immediate change of frequency. Based on inertia, it has a different slope to it. We call that the rate of change of frequency. Less inertia, larger rate of change of frequency. We have a nadir, the bottom. We have the B, which we call the settling space, and then the recovery period, which is usually DCS recovery, AGC response, etc. University of Tennessee, Knoxville started partnering with the NERC Resources Subcommittee and NERC in general quite a while ago, about 15 years ago. And they have these devices called FDRs, frequency data recorders. And if you're really cool, you have one in your office. I've got one in my office because I'm really cool. They needed one in Reno, Nevada. And I said, I live in Reno, Nevada. So they have a mesh of these things throughout the world, actually. And they collect this FDR data, frequency data recording data, about 20 samples a second. So it's not PMU speed, but it's fast enough to really measure frequency deviations. They have a situational awareness tool. It's not the best, but it does tell you what the frequency is doing in the interconnections, and you can clearly see the 3 interconnections in North America here, Western, Eastern, and Texas. And Hydro-Quebec. There's 4 interconnections in the West. Hydro-Quebec is the big blue one. But when there's a resource event, you'll see the frequency oscillate across the interconnections. You'll see the high frequency, low frequency on their gradient display there's a link to it in the PowerPoint. But they do one thing that's really cool too. They tell us when an event happens. So at the WECC situational awareness, we get these FNet reports. NERC gets these FNet reports. It comes in the email within 30 seconds of a frequency event occurring. They estimate where the event occurs, they estimate the magnitude, resource loss size if they can. They calculate the ROCOF. They do a lot of stuff for us on the NERC-RS. And they send us an email that something happened. This is my email this summer, and I did not filter it. I just gathered all my FNet emails, and this is by order that they came in. And I highlighted a red box on them. And if you notice, all the red boxes are very close to the top of the hour. That doesn't seem like a standard distribution of events. So there's a trigger limit of these. It's about 300 to 400 megawatts in the West. It takes a resource deficiency, loss of generation, or an increase of load of at least 300 megawatts for this FNet to trigger. We generally get a couple a week, 5 a week, maybe 10 a week, not 12 a day. We tied it to load changes within the Cal ISO. Top of hour load changes within the Cal ISO of significant magnitude to a move frequency. So this is one day in August that we saw. Another day in August, about a 700 megawatt load change instantaneously. A couple days later, 3 load changes in 3 different hours, all top of the hour. So something that I didn't believe would ever happen, virtual power plants. So these are Tesla Powerwalls. This is Tesla technology here. So Tesla has worked with the California Energy Commission, CPUC. I'm going to get this wrong, so don't crucify me. This is a market product. It's a result of the 2019 events that occurred in California where they were resource deficient. They set up a special market for aggregators to aggregate load and provide a resource into California during extreme emergencies. One thing that's part of that program is that if they're not called upon, and the call is based on pricing, if they're not called upon in a month, they have to do a demonstration test of 2 hours. So what we saw in July and August of this year was a whole bunch of Tesla Powerwalls turning on at the top of the hour, and then 2 hours later turning off. So this is just one of the events in my list, by the way. There's also a whole bunch of other events in my list. But virtual power plants are real. So these are Tesla Powerwalls behind the meter in residences, in garages all over California, all being aggregated through a common controller. And expect close to 1,000 megawatts of aggregation in California due to these Powerwalls. That's not all that we think is driving the FNet messages. Time of use rates in California. This is just a sample of PG&Es. If you don't live in California, that's not a typo. They do pay 72 cents if you have an EVB plan between 2 and 9 p.m. So there's great incentive to not charge during those hours. And in fact, you can save half your charging bill if you have a Tesla that knows the time of use rates that it's plugged into. So we started getting all these FNet emails. Everybody goes, what's going on at the top of the hour? So this is just a average frequency by time of day, 10-second samples for 3 weeks this summer. And if you notice, there's a whole bunch of frequency spikes right on the top of the hours. We believe this is EV charging in California driving these spikes. One of the basics of our grid operations is that loss of resource, increase of load is random and not coordinated. With Internet of Things, that is no longer the case. That is no longer the case. So this is the average frequency over a 3-week period this summer. This is the average frequency at midnight for 3 weeks. A really good friend of mine did this for us, engineer at Portland General. I won't say his name, but he did all this work for me. I didn't do it. But this is the average frequency at midnight every night this summer. Just as a reference, 5996, it's not bad. It's not a big deal. We operate there pretty consistently all the time, but it does represent about a 400 megawatt load change every night for 3 weeks. So he graphed it out. He went back. One of the great things about frequency is we all have a huge historian of frequency, so you can go back in time and look at what it's done. So he did this. So he looked at the 10 seconds before midnight versus the 10 seconds after midnight, looked at the delta frequency in those time frames and said, what's it doing? And what's really interesting about this is, does anybody remember what was going on in 2021? A lot of people working from home, not driving cars, maybe COVID. We had a pause in it in 2021. We believe it's because nobody was driving their cars. If you don't drive it, you don't need to charge it. But what's really interesting about this is it's growing almost exponentially. So my data scientist, I love having a data scientist on my staffs. I said, Peter, what's it look like in 10 years? So he only went out 6. But it looks like it's on path to be about 100 millihertz every night at midnight, every day of the month, every month of the year by 2031. As a reference, 100 millihertz change is a loss of Palo Verde. That's a nuke plant every day, every night at midnight. So one of the struggles is, has anybody ever here worked in rates? Nobody? Rates take forever to change. And changing rates won't really fix this. Because if you change the rates, it's smart enough to know what is the optimal time to charge. So there needs to be some work with third-party providers, is what we believe. So that's the West. And we thought, well, we're just the West, we're special. This is the same list from the Eastern Interconnection this summer. So this is the FNet list of the Eastern Interconnection. Same thing was happening in the East. We think it's a different cause. So this is just a list of FNets that occurred in the month of September, October. And what was weird is they are all showing up in Florida. In Florida, what FNet does is it kind of guesses what the event is. So if you look at the names there, there's a lot of Lauderdale Power Plant, Generation Trip near NCOT Power Plant, FRCC. Looks like a lot of Florida stuff. So it kind of guesses there's a big unit there. That must be the one that tripped. FNet does that through their mesh of FDRs. They can estimate where the unit loss was. Well, Florida Power didn't have any losses. They're getting this list, all these FNets. We're not getting any losses. We didn't have a nuke plant trip. We have SCADA. We know it tripped. This what's going on? FNet's broken. FNet's not broken. Google Nest started working a program this summer in the state of Florida, completely independent from utilities, not associated with any utility in Florida. It's called Google Nest Review. There's a link to an article on it here. So Florida Power and Light, the reason they discovered this was one of their SCADA engineers in their control center had a Google Nest thermostat, and he was aware of this program. And he thought he opted out of it. So just about everybody that bought a Google Nest in Florida was opted into this program, we think. And what Google is doing is they're looking at the resource mix in the interconnection. And in low carbon hours, they're turning up the AC. And in high carbon hours, they're turning down the AC in the state of Florida this summer, trying to optimize the carbon usage in the state of Florida. And again, this was not associated with any utility program. So here's the numbers from the article. Google has claimed, this is in 2024, they have 3 gigawatts of electrical energy, and they expect to expand it to 50 by 2030. So the Internet of Things is changing our world. So DOE projects that the tripling scale of virtual power plants could meet 10 to 20% of peak electricity demand by 2030. We have an emerging risk. The emerging risk is we built our whole world on non-predictable resource losses. And if we don't start working with these third-party vendors, it's predictable. And that means the variability goes away. And statistically, instead of 2 resource losses for our resource loss protection criteria, we probably got a plan for 3. And that's going to be a lot of money because everybody's got to carry frequency responsive reserves. And I think I'm done. Any questions?
Greg, we did get an online question.
Yes, ma'am.
What factors or accommodations have been given for future IBR shifting to grid forming?
So the question is, what considerations have we given to grid forming? WECC did a study about 3 years ago on the need for grid forming. I think it's ripe for another review. We don't have a grid forming standard in North America. We did meet with Tesla engineers. The RS did this summer, and we talked about grid forming a little bit. The batteries are grid forming capable, but in the United States, there's less than a handful of facilities that are grid forming. Right now, there's not a huge requirement that we have grid forming facilities, but I think when we look at our projected resource mix in the future, has a potential of changing very rapidly. So right now, there isn't a requirement for grid forming, but I think it's something we should definitely keep our eye on. Yes, sir.
Hi there. So I had a question. Are you guys talking with FERC about this? Because this should seem to be all part of the interconnection process on doing system impact studies. There's a lot of things that we know now that we didn't know when the original impact studies were being done. And I know some of the BAs and RCs are doing the studies, but it's impacting us other generator operators who aren't being included in that process. And really, it should be the entity that's interconnecting should be paying for this. It's kind of like when you build a house or a new community, the new guy on the block's got to pay for it. But instead, what we're getting rewarded with was new GOP standards that weren't an impact. We weren't causing the problem. It's the new guys were causing it. So is FERC being involved in this process? Changing that?
I think we do have a couple representatives of FERC that follow this on the NERC Resources Subcommittee. So FERC is aware of it. We're trying, the NERC RS is standing up a little bit of a strike team to start working with the utilities and the OEMs. The biggest problem is this is way outside of any NERC oversight under the current world we live in. This is retail load. It's strictly retail load. It's just being controlled by the Internet of Things, right? We have this. We've never had the ability to GPS time sync demand in the past, let alone control it in the past. Today, nobody sets a clock on anything. It's all this magic thing in your hand, and it's always right. It's kind of interesting. In the West, we maintain time error control. I don't know if anybody realizes that, but we do keep track of the frequency deviation over time. We call that time error. And we generally swing about plus minus 200 seconds of time control in the West. Why that's important is clocks used to run on it. And if you've got a microwave and it's never in time with this, it's because we're swinging our system frequency that much on a yearly basis. So you can set your microwave today, and in 2 months it's going to be off again, and you're going to say, my microwave's gone bad. No, the frequency is consistently moving that much. We got rid of our time error correction standard about 2019. We stopped doing time error corrections way back then. We do automatic time error correction in the West, and we don't have a problem. The East is in persistent overgeneration. They've been overgenerating since about 2016 by 200 megawatts an hour, and they do continuous time control in the East. My answer to you is FERC is aware. We're not sure that FERC can solve it. I think it's going to be a collaboration between us at NERC and WECC and all the regional entities and the utilities and the third-party OEMs. It's going to be very difficult to write federal standards that says you can't turn on or off things the way we always used to.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
But I'm not if I could be the king for a day.
Okay.
But I'm not the king for a day.
Well, I'm just curious because there's interconnection studies that are supposed to be done, and a lot of this is supposed to be handled in the system impact study phase. And most of this, a lot of these studies, especially when you deal with renewables, are being done in clusters by the BA or the RC. And part of the issue is we, as generator operators who have plants out in the system also, we have to do our own studies. And so we do studies, but we don't have all the information that they have. And the other thing is they collect monies, which they're required to do by the FERC process for doing interconnection process, but we have to pay for our studies, and they're supposed to be giving us monies for our studies and getting it from the entity that's doing the interconnecting, but the BAs and RCs won't pay us for doing our work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the top of the hour stuff is really interesting because it's way behind an interconnection point, right? It's
Right.
it's at the grid edge. It's these grid edge devices. They're part of retail rates, and those are all under the control of state PUCs, which we're trying to. The reason for this presentation, the reason I put this in this presentation, was at least to gain industry acknowledgement of, hey, why is frequency moving at the top of every hour? You might have some of your generator operators asking this. This is really weird. I know we've had many BAs when the graphics I showed you were done by a BA engineer because their operators were complaining that much. One of the utilities in the West, they have frequency responsive reserves in a condensing hydro unit. They sit there. Condensing means you're not running any water through it. You've evacuated the turbine housing, and that unit is just ready to go. And they have frequency controls on that device that turn the unit on almost instantaneously. And they were seeing their unit turn on about 3 times a day because it was meeting the frequency deviation for that trigger event. So this is being recognized by the operators in the systems, and it's something that we have work to do. So we heard earlier that we're moving at the speed of risk. We're moving at the speed of risk. WECC is really trying to do things data-driven. That's our ultimate goal, is what's the data telling us? What is the reliability risk? Tim will talk about it tomorrow a little bit. Our risk management process is strictly a data-driven process. Everything I showed you today, we've done evaluation on. We don't think there's a stated reliability risk today. When we look at 2030, when we have 100 millihertz change every midnight, I think there might be a reliability risk there. So it is on our radar of things we have to be aware of. Like I said, the industry was really caught off guard this summer. We hadn't been working with these OEMs at all. We recognize we have a lot of work to do with OEMs that we don't think we can do through the standard process, just because of jurisdiction is going to be very, very difficult. It's a retail rate issue. Any other questions? How am I doing on time, sir? Anybody have a problem with going to lunch 13 minutes early? Really quick, I do want to really promote the work of my team. The System Performance Data Portal, just about everything I showed you today, except for the top of our stuff, is available on our System Performance Data Portal. If you go to WECC.org, it's one of the highlighted links at the very top. We have lots and lots of data out there, the size of our resource mix, what's going on. Encourage you to use it internally, share your feedback with us. What can we do to make it better? Our next project is a reliability assessment data portal. We're working on that this year. A team in the Rapid side of the house is working on, let's start putting our reliability assessment data out on a public portal so people can access it more readily. So we do have a lot of work going on at WECC to make the data readily available. We want to get the message out that our grid is changing, and we have to keep our eye on the ball. It's not the same grid that I operated when I started 35 years ago. So thank you very much.